Welcome to the Sci-Fireplace. These are the 11 books that I've read since the upload of my last video. Least favorite was The Godmakers by Frank Herbert. I found a derivative of Dune. And barely memorable. It's a fix-up novel, meaning it's a series of short stories that are smashed together to form a coherent novel. I remember almost nothing about it. I just remember feeling like I was reading a reheated leftover from Dune. It was kind of empty calories for me. Next, I'm really sad to say, is The Crystal World by J.G. Ballard. And this is a first edition hardcover that I picked up at a flea market for $1, maybe less. I love aesthetically the book. This is one of my favorite genre books that I own. I didn't dislike the book, but I found it overly literary and boring. It's about a doctor who treats lepers, going to a remote part of Africa to try to get back in contact with a female colleague of his that he had a romantic affair with, who has been working in this remote outpost, and there's this strange phenomenon happening in the jungle that I don't really want to describe because it'll spoil it. I again did not dislike the book. It was like a book written for a college literature class seminar. Number 9 is The Hitchhiker's Guide. I had not read it until now. I have some good things to say about it. The big note is that I didn't think it was all that funny. Like, I'm a snob when it comes to comedy, and I'm a tough sell, so take that as context. But the humor, there were like a couple jokes in it that I thought were good. I thought the depressed robot was funny. It's fine. I'm not trying to piss people off or be a contrarian. I thought it was fine. I wasn't blown away by it, and I'm not really motivated to read the other ones in the series. There were some interesting hard sci-fi in it, or I don't know if it's hard sci-fi, but sci-fi conceits, like the what do they call it? The space drive that runs on coincidence. There's a specific name for it. I'm sure I'm pissing people off even more by not being able to invoke it by name, but that's an interesting conceit. I didn't get that feeling of like, where have I been? Why have I not read this before that I got from reading Dune for the first time? Alright, if that one didn't infuriate you, the next one is Fellowship of the Ring, which I have attempted to finish probably a dozen times in my life before I finally just picked it up and finished the job. I have always found it painfully boring and slow. I liked it a lot more dipping into it this time than any of the foregoing times, just because I guess I hadn't noticed how melancholic the story is, and there's all of this heavy lamentation, all of this hand-wringing, and all of this sense of kind of overarching sadness and grief in the book that I think gives it a depth of flavor that I had been missing before. It was boring. It's not quite my flavor, but I did like it enough this time around to motivate me to want to actually read the other 2 books. It's one of those, genre homework assignments that's way overdue. Number 7 is The Genocides by Thomas Dish. It was written in, 65? Yeah, 1965. Pretty remarkable for having been written when it was. There are scenes in this that are as disturbing as anything that I've read or seen anywhere, movies or books. Really dark. The story is about a small community of people living in rural, I think Michigan, somewhere in the Midwest, who are attempting to survive and cope with an invasion of alien plants that have taken over the entire planet. Like sequoia-size plants that grow super fast and really large, and they choke out all other vegetation. They live in kind of an old world, patriarchal, religious, puritanical, Calvinist society, and the book is a criticism of that and those values. I actually got flashes of Handmaid's Tale a lot. Kind of the same themes, kind of the same criticisms. I like it more than Handmaid's Tale. I do think it has lost a little bit of its immediate relevance. Maybe it's the fact that I'm I live in godless California, but like these archetypes don't have big targets on their back for me anymore. Like these are not people that I encounter on a regular basis. It's thematically well-trodden ground. I was blown away by the book in its audacity and in the graphicness of a lot of the violence and other events that happen in it. I wasn't blown away on like a thematic level or a storytelling level, but super memorable. I mean, this is gonna stick right in the crevices of my brain for a long time. I would actually count this as sci-fi horror, but it's the horror that is among us, not the alien horror that is truly horror. It's kind of the point. Next is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. This is one of those mega classics where you know everything that happens, but it was overwhelmingly charming. I don't think it's anything terribly profound, even though it gets this treatment as like whatever, a classic of psychedelia, and it says all these things about the nature of consciousness. I didn't really get that from it at all. It's just kind of a semi-frivolous, but written with literary chops kind of children's story. I just thought it was like the most nutritious little bit of candy floss reading that you could really hope for. Number 5 is Jack Vance's The Blue World, which is the second Jack Vance book that I've read after the first Dying Earth book. It's about this ocean planet where a prison ship crash lands, and many generations hence, there are human colonies that live on these gigantic lily pads that are able to cultivate some kind of basic infrastructure to live, and they are ruled by this enormous sea monster that bullies them into lending them tribute in the form of crops that they grow on the lily pads. And there is a cast of kind of priests who worship the monster and are sort of its agents in human affairs. And there's a guy who rises up and attempts to rally the humans to try to kill the monsters so that they can live without having to be under its thumb. Really simple story, excellent world building, and Jack Vance's writing style is unique and hard to describe, where everybody speaks in this flowery, almost Victorian kind of prose. Like everybody is speechifying all the time and clutching their pearls, and everybody has the same level of vocabulary, which I think sometimes he plays for humor, like in Dying Earth, and other times he doesn't. In this book, I don't think that he does. But everybody speaks like a college professor. It's really an adventure story. It's the kind of thing that you can read in a couple of sittings, and it's fairly gripping. Action is well paced, and also it's a neat, tidy little metaphor that is generally applicable to a lot of different things, kind of universally meaningful story. A nice middle ground of form and substance. Number 4, I just finished this last night. It's The Boat of a Million Years, which I picked at random. It's the first Poul Anderson book that I've read. I had it in my mind that as someone who wrote as copiously as he did, I mean, I find his books everywhere, that it would be quantity over quality, that he would be kind of a hacky writer, and he absolutely was not, at least in this book. The premise is there are a tiny, 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 vanishingly tiny number of humans who are born whose bodies regenerate themselves, so they heal from injuries very quickly, they recover from illnesses almost immediately, and therefore they are immortal. It's a chronicle of these immortals as they age through various periods of human history, the people that they encounter, the relationships that they have with mortals and with one another. It's really more of a fantasy book than it is a sci-fi book. I would say the first like 4/5 of the book are historical fantasy, and then the last fifth is science fiction, which I wasn't anticipating, and kind of created a little bit of tension in the reading experience because the cover is a spaceship, and I was reading about ancient Rome for 100 pages. So it's kind of waiting for the sci-fi shoe to drop, and it doesn't drop for a long time. But once you settle into the rhythm of it, it is a really good book, and the quality of the writing is high. Anderson marshals an impressive amount of historical literacy that comes to bear in the stories. You can tell that he read extensively in the historical periods that he was portraying. It wasn't anything that blew me away. It was just consistently good. It was a little repetitive, especially in the middle part. It just has this structure that keeps repeating, of the characters kind of having the same conversation again and again and again and going through the same motions. And a lot of it is really sort of even, kind of slow, with these big spikes of action that are really gripping, really well written. But it's just an even 7 out of 10 for the entire book. It was a book that deserved to be that long, and it created the desired effect of feeling this huge passage of time over thousands of years. Number 3 was the third book in the Dying Earth quadrilogy, Cudgel's Saga. To spoil number 2, number 2 is The Eyes of the Overworld, which is book 2. I'll talk about actually number 2 first, and then I'll talk about Cudgel's Saga. So the first, I guess I'll talk about the first Dying Earth book. The first Dying Earth book was the first Jack Vance book I had read, and I don't think I quite had acclimated to his writing style and his pace, his sensibility. So I don't know if it was missing from that book or I just didn't pick up on it, but this kind of playful, tongue-in-cheek tone that he wrote the other 2 books that I just read was missing to me from the first Dying Earth book. So the first Dying Earth book is heavily atmospheric and a little more serious and a little more focused on world building, which is why I compared it favorably to Shadow of the Torturer, Book of the New Sun. And in a previous video I actually said that I think it is a superior reading experience to Shadow of the Torturer, which I might still actually believe. Eyes of the Overworld, the book that follows that, is different. It's a big departure. So it's much more strictly a fantasy novel than the sci-fantasy of the first Dying Earth book, and it's much more a comedy. I think it loses something if you haven't read the first Dying Earth book, and people recommend a lot online that you skip the first one and start with Eyes of the Overworld, which I think would be a mistake. It follows the trials and travails of this anti-hero named Cudgel, who's kind of a trickster, scam artist, buffoon, who nevertheless is really shrewd, wildly selfish, self-serving, and backstabbing. Kind of a familiar stock character. Cudgel is persuaded to attempt to rob the mansion of a very powerful wizard who catches him and punishes him by banishing him thousands of miles away to the North Pole, where he has to connive his way back to exact revenge on the wizard, and befalls all of these pitfalls and adventures along the way. Just a simple premise, and it's so funny. I think Cudgel is a great character because the general way this trope plays out, this super selfish protagonist character trope, is that they eventually come to be punished for their selfish ways by the consequences of their selfish action coming back around to fall on them. And Cudgel is a hilarious character because that just doesn't happen. That's not how the character is written. He's just wildly selfish and winds up murdering a bunch of people through his negligence and selling people into slavery and doing just horrific things for his own purposes. And he basically just gets away with it, which is, I think, kind of the humor of the character. I think it's Vance playing with that convention. It's all of that character work and all of that really perfectly pitched comedy with this additional layer of excellent fantasy world building and kind of gripping adventure stories layered on top of it. I think it's wonderful. It's probably my favorite fantasy book that I've read. Cudgel's Saga is the sequel to Eyes of the Overworld, which is longer and a little slower, and really is just an extension of Eyes of the Overworld. I can't talk about the premise without spoiling the ending of Eyes of the Overworld. It's kind of just more of the same. It's not quite as funny as Eyes of the Overworld, and it's not quite as exciting, but it's more of a flavor that I really enjoy a lot. So I loved it. Number 1 is Solaris by Stanislav Lem. It's about a human research colony that is orbiting like on a space station, this planet that's home to this enormous gelatinous organism that coats its surface like an ocean. And the human scientists are trying to determine if the alien is intelligent, what the nature of its intelligence is, and what its purpose is. So it forms these big structures, these big elaborate structures that are temporary and then disintegrate and have these corollaries, like they're mathematically symbolic. So there are all these competing theories of what the Solaris planet organism is attempting to do. If it's kind of like a biological computer, it seems to be working on these like quantum mechanics problems. A new researcher arrives at the space station and all is not well. It's basically a ghost story. It is very, very close to being science fiction horror, and in terms of the tension that it builds tension like a horror story. Beautifully written. It's one of those books that I feel almost silly talking about it because I know that I'm outclassed by the book. There's a level of sophistication of the science discussed in the book, and a sophistication of the literary treatment of the plot and the characters that just has to be read. I can't really describe it. It's a special book, I think. It deserves to be considered a mega classic as it is. It really is an exception. It really is in that top 1% of achievement in terms of everything that it does. And I cannot help but put it as number 1. Even though there are books in here that I think I enjoyed reading more, it has to be number 1. It has to take the crown. And now my favorite part. We're gonna pick at random the next book. Ah, cool. All right. The Sheep Look Up by John Brunner. How awesome is that cover? This was shortlisted for me. This was one of the ones that I was hoping would get picked. All right, thanks for watching, guys.